I've told this to exactly 3 people in the 11 years since it happened. 2 of them stopped returning my calls inside a month. The third was a psychologist the county made me see, and she wrote in her notes that I was suffering from occupational isolation stress, which is a clean and professional way of saying that a man who spends 6 weeks alone in an empty building will eventually begin to hear things that are not there. I let her write it. It was easier than the truth, and it kept my license and my contracts. And for a while, I even tried to believe it myself. But I still have the photographs. I still have the page. And a torn page out of a leather book does not suffer from occupational isolation stress. So I'm going to lay it all out the way it actually happened, in the order I learned it, with the dates and the documents and the names, and you can decide for yourself what to do with it. I've had 11 years to decide, and I'm still not finished deciding, and I've come to think I never will be. My name doesn't matter much for this, but you can call me Wade Corrigan, because that's the name that matters to the rest of the story, whether I want it to or not. In the fall of 2014, I was 39 years old, and I did historic preservation survey work on a contract basis out of Missoula, Montana. That's a real job, even if nobody's ever heard of it. When a county or a state historical society gets a grant to document an old structure, a mine, a schoolhouse, a whole abandoned town site, somebody has to go out and inventory everything inside it, measure the buildings, photograph the artifacts, cross-reference every object against deed records and census data so the collection has legal and historical provenance and can't be looted or faked or sold off piecemeal. It is slow, careful, lonely work, and I was good at it precisely because I was the kind of man who liked being alone with old things and a clipboard more than I liked most rooms full of people. I mention all of this so you understand I am not a man who scares easily, and I am not a man who went up that mountain hoping to find a ghost. I went up hoping to finish an inventory, submit a clean report, and get the second half of my check. I was, at that point in my life, the last person on earth who would have believed a word of what I'm about to tell you. The job came through the Powell County Historical Society, but the money behind it was a preservation grant, administered partly through the state and partly through a private foundation I'd never heard of, called the Ashcroft Legacy Trust. Hold on to that name. At the time, it was just a line item on a contract and a routing number on a check, and I gave it no more thought than I gave the paper the contract was printed on. The site was a place called Refuge, Montana. You won't find much about it, and what little you find is wrong. It sits in a fold of the Garnet Range, up in the mountains east of Missoula and north of the old mining district around Garnet itself, which is a genuine ghost town the Bureau of Land Management keeps up for tourists, with interpretive signs and a portable toilet and a gravel lot. Refuge is not one of those. It's on private land now, deeded to that same trust, up a Forest Service spur road, 1874, if you want to look for it. Though the gate's been chained for years, and I'm the reason the chain doesn't hang right anymore. That turns off the main Bear Gulch route. The nearest real town is Drummond, about 40 minutes down out of the mountains, sitting on Interstate 90 along the Clark Fork River. Drummond calls itself the home of the Bulldoggers, and it means it. There's a rodeo grounds and a high school and a bar and a Catholic church and a gas station, and not a great deal else. I want you to picture how empty that country really is. In late October, once the summer people have cleared out and the outfitters have pulled their camps, you can drive that whole valley at dusk and not pass a single set of headlights coming the other way. The Historical Society's director was a woman named Priscilla Hartang, 60s, silver-haired, wire glasses on a beaded chain, sharp as a tack and twice as careful. The kind of small-town institution keeper who has forgotten more local history than most people ever learn, and who has learned over a long career exactly how much of it to say out loud to a stranger. She met me at the Society's office in Deer Lodge to hand off the keys and the paperwork. And I remember she held onto the ring of keys a second longer than she needed to before she let me take it, the way you hold onto a dog's collar before you let it off the leash near a road. "You'll be up there alone," she said. "You understand that part. There's no cell service past Bear Gulch, none at all, so don't count on it. There's a landline in the museum building that runs off a Forest Service repeater on the ridge, and it works when the weather's decent and doesn't when it isn't. You call in every evening, 7 o'clock sharp. If you miss 2 nights in a row, I send the sheriff's office up. Not one night. People miss one night. The line goes down. Whatever. 2 nights, I send somebody. Are we clear on that? I told her I'd done remote sites before. Plenty of them. And I had. Fire lookouts. A drowned town under a reservoir drawdown. A leper colony's chapel on an island in Lake Superior. I told her the 7 o'clock call wouldn't be a problem. Not like this one, she said. And she wasn't bragging on the place. She said it the way you'd warn somebody about a stretch of black ice. I asked her what she meant. She did that thing that careful rural people do, where they decide mid-sentence that they've already said a little more than they meant to, and she smoothed it over with a professional's ease. It's isolated is all. People get funny up there. It gets into your head, being that alone. The last cataloger we sent lasted 9 days. What happened to him? Nothing happened to him. A little too quickly. He quit, said the work was fine, the collection was fine. He just couldn't sleep. Said he kept hearing the front door of the museum open and close at night, and every morning it was still locked. That's isolation for you. The Mind Manufactures Company. She slid the keys the rest of the way across the desk. You'll be documenting the whole town site, all 19 standing structures. But the priority is the museum building. The Reason family kept everything. Every ledger, every photograph, every object anyone ever left or lost or sold up there across 100 years. It is the most complete, unbroken collection of its kind in the state of Montana, and nobody has ever properly cataloged it. That's why the grant exists. I stopped her there, because I'd read the name Reason 3 separate times in the paperwork, and assumed each time it was a typo somebody had failed to catch. The town's called Refuge, but the family that founded it was named Reason, Anselm Reason. She said the name carefully, giving each syllable its own small space, the way you'd set down something you didn't want to drop. Came out from Pennsylvania in 1889, made a modest strike, built the town, named it Refuge, ran it more or less as his own private kingdom until he died. The last of the line was a granddaughter, Ada Reason. She died in 2009. She willed the whole town site to the trust with the condition that it be preserved and cataloged in perpetuity, but never, and this is in the will, in the actual legal language, never open to the public. Not a museum. Never a museum. That's the part the grant people don't put in the press release. You are documenting, at considerable public expense, a museum that is legally forbidden from ever becoming a museum. I asked her why on earth anyone would fund that. She said the trust funded it, and the trust had its own money and its own reasons, and it wasn't the Historical Society's business to ask, only to administer. I asked her why Ada Reason would set such a thing up. She said she didn't know, and I believed then and believe now that she believed that. But I also came to understand, much later, that not knowing and not wanting to know are 2 different things. And Priscilla Hartang had spent 30 years perfecting the second one. Then she told me the one thing that, looking back on all of it, was the only real warning I got, and I heard it as a curator's fussiness and nothing more. When you're up there, she said, there's a guest book in the front room, a visitor's book. Old thing, leather, tall, sits on a little pine stand right beside the front door. Leave it be. Don't catalog it. Don't move it. Don't dust it. Don't so much as breathe on it. The trust was extremely specific in writing. It is not part of the collection. It's a visitor's book in the front room of a museum, I said. That's about the most part of the collection object I can picture. That's provenance gold, a century of who came and went. Do you have any idea what that's worth to the record? It is not part of the collection, she said again, in a voice that closed the subject like a coffin lid, and that was the end of it. And I drove up the mountain the next morning thinking about my check. The road in tells you a great deal about a place if you're paying attention, and paying attention was my whole trade. Bear Gulch is graded gravel, badly washboarded, climbing steadily through second-growth lodgepole and Douglas fir, the Clark Fork dropping away behind and below you in a bright thread until the timber closes over it and it's gone. Then the spur, Forest Service Road, 1874, which had a marker so sun-faded and shot through I nearly drove past the turn. Somebody had used the sign for target practice years back, and rust bled down from the bullet holes like the sign was weeping. There was a steel gate the trust had given me the combination for, and past the gate, the road got worse and the timber got older. And that's the detail that first made the hair on my neck stand up, though I didn't know why yet. Old growth stands the loggers never reached have a particular quality. The trees stand farther apart. The canopy rides higher. The ground beneath is open and swept-looking and unnaturally quiet. And I noticed, driving that last mile, that the woods around Refuge were far older than the woods around it had any right to be, given that Refuge had been a mining town, and mining towns strip every stick of timber within miles for shoring and stamp mills and stove wood. The forest should have been young and even aged from a century of regrowth. Instead, the timber closest to the town was the oldest of all, as though the forest had been left completely alone since long before the mine, or as though nothing had wanted to cut it, or as though nothing living had been in there to cut it in a very long time. I noted a great deal of deer sign on that spur, and elk, and about a mile up, on a lightning-killed snag, a bald eagle that watched my truck pass without turning its head. That last part is normal eagle behavior, and I only tell you because I noticed it. And I want you to understand from the start that I noticed everything up there, that noticing was my profession and my nature, and that this is exactly why I could not, in the end, unsee what I saw. Refuge sits in a hanging valley, a high bowl maybe half a mile across, with a clear creek running through the bottom of it that feeds down toward Bear Gulch. And the setting is, I have to tell you, genuinely beautiful. That's the thing nobody prepares you for about places like this. You brace for gloom and desolation, and you come around the last bend into an alpine meadow gone gold and rust with the turning of the year, aspens quaking silver along the creek, the standing buildings scattered up the north-facing slope, and behind them the gray shoulders of the garnets holding up a sky so big it makes your chest ache. There were 19 structures still standing, and I counted them from the cab of my truck before I ever shut off the engine, because counting is how I calm myself. A loose cluster of miners' cabins, most of them collapsed into gray heaps of squared logs, a larger two-story boarding house with half its roof gone, a stamp mill down by the creek, its heavy timbers silvered and sagging toward the water, a schoolhouse with the bell still hanging in its little cupola, and up the slope, set well apart from all the working buildings, the two structures that had clearly kept the collection alive across a century, a big two-story frame farmhouse, its white paint weathered to the gray white of old bone, and beside it, a long single-story building with a proper covered porch that had once been the town store and post office, and which the Reason family had at some point converted into their private museum. And above everything, at the very head of the valley, standing higher and more alone than anything else, there was a church. I need to be precise about the church, because in the end, it is the whole story. It was small and plain, white clapboard, a squat bell tower with a bell still in it, a low picket fence around a graveyard out back. Completely, boringly ordinary for the period and the region. Methodist, I assumed, or one of the non-denominational union churches that mining camps threw up, so the various Protestant flavors could share a preacher. I photographed it that first afternoon from a distance of about 200 yards, and made a note to inventory it in the second or third week, once I'd cleared the museum and the town site. I did not set foot inside it for 8 more days. I need you to hold on to that. Whatever the church was, it waited for me. It was patient. Everything up there was patient. I set up in the museum building because it had the working landline, a cast-iron wood stove, a narrow cot in the back room that a decade of catalogers before me had slept on, a chemical toilet in a lean-to out back, and a diesel generator with a full drum of fuel and a maintenance log hanging on a nail beside it. My routine was simple, and I held to it the way you hold to a railing. Up at first light, work the standing structures and the town site through the good daylight hours, measuring, photographing, filling out the standard state inventory forms, one per structure, one per significant object. Back to the museum by mid-afternoon, to work the interior collection under the lamps and the wood stove. Cook something. Call Priscilla at 7. Sleep. Repeat. The first thing that was wrong, I noticed on the very first night, and I explained it away, because that's what a reasonable man does with the first thing. I'd made my 7 o'clock call. I'd banked the stove. I'd laid out the next day's forms on the big oak work table so they'd be ready in the morning. 3 blank structure forms, my clipboard, 2 pencils sharpened, my camera, and my field notebook squared up to the table edge, because I am a tidy man, and a tidy desk is a tidy mind. I turned off the lamp and lay down on the cot in the back room, and I slept the flat black sleep of a man who's been driving mountain roads all day. In the morning, the forms were fanned out across the table in a loose arc, the 2 pencils lying crossed, and my field notebook was open, not to the first page, open to a page near the middle that I had not yet written on, a page that should have been blank, and it was blank, but it was open, held flat, as though someone had been reading in it and set it down to attend to something and meant to come right back. I stood there a while. Then I told myself the truth as I understood it. I'd laid the things out, half asleep, and misremembered, and the notebook had fallen open on its own, the way books do, along a weak spot in the binding. I even bent the notebook back and forth to find the weak spot. I couldn't find one. It was a new notebook, but I decided I'd found one, because deciding is cheaper than the alternative, and I made my coffee and I went to work. The collection was extraordinary, and it deserves a moment before the rest of it swallows the story whole. Priscilla hadn't oversold a thing. The Reason family had kept everything, not just their own possessions, but the material life of the entire town across 100 years. Mining tools laid out and labeled, assay records in bound folios, bolts of trade cloth gone to dust-colored ghosts of their patterns. A wall, a whole wall, floor to ceiling, 12 feet of it, of tintype and albumin photographs, hundreds upon hundreds of them, miners and their wives and their children and their dead, every single one labeled on the back in the same spidery, slanting, deliberate hand. Store ledgers going back to 1891, school attendance rolls, and a tall glass-fronted cabinet of personal effects, each item sealed in its own hand-labeled paper envelope. A woman's wedding band, a man's pocket watch with the crystal cracked, a child's single button-up shoe, a folded pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, a lock of dark hair tied with thread. It was, as a record of a vanished American place, close to priceless, and cataloging it should have been the best 6 weeks of my working life. The visitor book sat on its pine stand beside the front door exactly where Priscilla had said it would be. Leather, cracked, maybe 14 inches tall, the kind of ledger a hotel or a bank would have used. I walked past it 40 times a day. I did not open it. I'm a professional. A client instruction is a client instruction. And honestly, after the first day, I forgot it was even a thing I'd been told about. It was furniture. It was part of the wall. On the 5th day, I found the first thing that could not be explained away by tired hands or a weak binding. I was cataloging the photograph wall, working left to right, cross-referencing the labeled faces against the store ledgers and the copies of the federal census I'd brought up with me. Standard provenance work, the meat of the job. And I came to a large group photograph, a big one, mounted on board, maybe 40 people arranged in 3 rows in front of the boarding house, some town gathering. Dated on the back in that same spidery hand, Refuge, Montana, All Souls, 1901. All Souls, not the town, not picnic or 4th of July or Sunday after church. All Souls. I photographed it, logged it, and moved on. But it snagged in me, the way a wrong word snags. A splinter. You keep coming back to run your thumb over. That evening after my call, I dug the 1900 federal census for the district back out of my file box. The enumerator had walked Refuge in June of 1900. He had recorded, in his own tidy government hand, precisely 111 residents. The photograph, taken a year later and titled All Souls, showed 40. I counted them 4 times, once out loud. 40 souls in a town of 111 people. There are ordinary explanations, and I wrote them all down, because writing them down is the discipline. People move on, minds play out. A photograph is a single afternoon, not a roster. Plenty of people miss the day the traveling photographer comes through. I noted every one of these, but All Souls kept its hook in me. And once you begin watching the numbers in a complete records collection, you cannot make yourself stop. The store ledgers were continuous, day by day, from 1891 forward. And here is the first hard fact I need you to hold. They stopped in March of 1902. Not tapered, not thinned out, stopped. The last entry was dated March 19, 1902. An ordinary line, 2 pounds of coffee and a spool of thread, sold to a name I couldn't decipher. After that, blank ruled pages, dozens of them. And then the ledger simply resumed, in the same hand, on a day in November of 1902, as though nothing at all had interrupted it. 8 months, gone, out of a book that had faithfully recorded every nail, every needle, every twist of tobacco for 11 straight years. That night, the 5th night, is the night I first heard the footsteps and understood that Priscilla's last cataloger had not been imagining anything. I was on the cot. The stove ticked as it cooled, and out in the main room, on the plank floor I'd walked all day, someone crossed from the front door to the work table and back. Slow, unhurried, deliberate footsteps. The particular heavy creak of the 3rd board from the window, the one I'd have to note in the structure form as a hazard. Then a pause at the work table. Then the sound of paper, the dry whisper of a page being turned. Then footsteps back to the front of the room, and then nothing. I lay rigid in the dark with my heart going like a fist on a door, and I did what a reasonable man does. I told myself the building was cooling and settling, that old wood pops and cracks, that isolation manufactures pattern out of random noise. I did not get up. I want to be honest about that. I told myself I didn't get up because there was nothing to get up for. But the truth is, I didn't get up because some animal part of me, older than reason, knew that if I walked out into that main room, I would not be alone, and that whatever was turning the pages would look up at me. In the morning, my field notebook was open again, near the middle, to a blank page, and my camera, which I had left on the far end of the work table, was sitting square in the center, lens cap off, pointed at the front door. I went down to Drummond that afternoon. I told myself it was for supplies. I was low on a few things, genuinely. But the truth is I wanted to hear a human voice that wasn't coming out of a telephone, and I wanted to ask some questions in the one place where the answers live, which is any small-town bar in the mid-afternoon. The bar was the Wagon Wheel, and it had exactly 2 customers at 4 in the afternoon, both men well north of 70, and a bartender of maybe 50, who was plainly kin to one of them. I bought a round, which is the toll you pay to sit at that kind of bar and ask that kind of question, and then I said, easy as I could, that I was doing survey work up at the old Reason place for the Historical Society. The temperature of the room changed. Not dramatically, nobody gasped, nobody dropped a glass. But one of the old men, a rancher I'd learned was named Gil Pruitt, set his beer down flat on the bar and looked at me for a long, level moment before he said a word, and the look was not unfriendly. It was the look you give a man you've just found out is standing on a mine. They got somebody up there again, he said. Not to me, to the other old man. Cataloging the museum, I said. For the society. 6 weeks. You call down every night? The other man asked. He never did give me his name. Gil called him nothing but you the whole afternoon. I said I did. 7 o'clock. Good, Gil said. You keep doing that. Every night. On the dot. And here's my advice. Take it or leave it. You do your calling, and your eating, and your bedding down before dark. And once it's dark, you stay inside that building, and you don't go out for anything you hear. Anything. You hear the sweetest sound of your whole life out in that meadow, you stay in. You hear somebody call your own name, you stay in. And whatever else you do, you don't go up toward that church after dark. I asked him, as gently and as reasonably as I could manage, what he thought I'd hear. He didn't answer that. Instead, he told me a story, and the bartender, his granddaughter, it turned out, went very still behind the taps while he told it, wiping the same glass the whole time without looking at it, which told me she had heard this before and had never once decided it was only a story. My grandfather ran cattle up in the Garnets, Gil said. Summer range, high country. He knew the Reason place back when there were still Reasons living in it. And he told me one time, and understand, he was not a man who told stories. He thought storytelling was next thing to lying. He told me Refuge had a sickness come through in the spring of 1902. Diphtheria, they called it after. Killed a big slew of them, quick. And he said the ones that were left afterward, they came out of it wrong. Wouldn't come down the mountain to trade. Wouldn't let the county doctor up. Ran him off with a shotgun when he tried. And they built onto the church. Built onto it how? I don't know how. That's just the words he used. And he used them careful. Built onto the church. And he said the reason nobody in this whole valley will set foot up there after dark. And that's going back 4 generations now. That's not just me being an old fool. Is that the Reasons found a way, up there, to keep their dead. Gil drank. You can laugh if you want. My grandfather never laughed about it. And he shot a man once over a fence line, so I tend to take the things he was serious about seriously. I didn't laugh. I asked the only question that mattered to me at that moment. How many people are up there now? Gil looked at me like I'd asked something foolish. None. Last of them died years back, the granddaughter. It's empty. Everybody in this county knows it's empty. Then why can't I go outside after dark if it's empty? And the other old man, the one with no name, answered. He didn't look up from his beer when he said it. And he said it flat and tired. The way you state a fact you've made your peace with. It's the sentence I've carried in my chest for 11 years. Empty's not the same thing as nobody there. On my way out of Drummond, I made one more stop. Because the mystery had its hook all the way in me now, and I was no longer just a man buying groceries. I stopped at the county courthouse annex where the historical records and the older newspapers are kept, and I asked the clerk, a bored young woman with earbuds in, whether they had anything on Refuge or on the Reason family or on an epidemic in 1902. They had one thing. She pulled it on microfilm, a single item from the New Northwest, the Deer Lodge paper, dated April of 1902. It was 3 sentences long, buried below a notice about a church social. It read that word had reached Deer Lodge of a malignant sore throat at the Reason camp of Refuge, that Dr. E.M. Cathro had ridden up to render aid, and that Dr. Cathro reported the camp well in hand and requiring no further assistance. That was all. No follow-up, no death notices, no list of the lost. 22 people died that spring. I'd count their stones 2 days later. In a county that printed a death notice for a stillborn calf, and the paper of record has 3 sentences and a doctor's assurance that everything was fine. I asked the clerk if there was anything on Dr. Cathro. She found his obituary. He died in 1904, only 2 years later, at the age of 41, of what the paper called an affliction of the nerves, having left the practice of medicine entire the previous year and kept much to his home. A 41-year-old country doctor who rode up to Refuge in the spring of 1902 told everyone the camp was well in hand, quit medicine within the year, went strange in his own house, and was dead inside too. I drove back up the mountain in the last of the light with all of that turning over in me, and I want to be honest about my state of mind because it bears on everything after. I did not believe the church kept its dead. What I believed was that I had stumbled onto a genuine and significant historical tragedy, a town that lost 1/5 of its people in a single spring, went silent and erased itself from its own records for 8 months, drove off the outside world, and turned strange and inward and possibly cultish afterward, which is a documented human pattern. Grief in an isolated community does exactly that, and I believed the local legend was ordinary folklore, the kind that always grows up over a real wound like scar tissue, exaggerated across 4 generations of firelight. And I believed that a country doctor might well quit and drink himself to death over having watched 22 people, children among them, choke to death on their own throats, while he stood there helpless with 1902's medicine in his bag. That is what an investigation is. You find the hole in the record, and you follow it down. I made my 7 o'clock call from the museum, and Priscilla asked how it was going, and I told her, truthfully, that the collection was remarkable, and that I'd turned up some fascinating gaps in the 1902 records I intended to run down. There was a silence on the line, longer than the repeater delay accounts for. "Run down the records all you want," she said finally. "Leave the church out of it. I heard the story in town today, about them keeping their dead. Everybody's heard it, Mr. Corrigan. It's 100 years old." A pause. "How are you sleeping up there?" I didn't answer that honestly. I said fine. She said good. And 7 o'clock tomorrow. And the line went dead. And I sat there a while with the dead phone against my ear, listening to the nothing on it, until I became aware that I was straining to hear whether there was footsteps in the nothing, and I made myself hang up. Then I did the thing I should not have done. I got up and I went to the front room and I looked at the visitor book by lamplight, properly, for the first time. It was open. It had been closed every previous day. I was certain. I am the kind of man who registers whether a book is open or shut, the way other men register whether a door is locked. Now it lay face up on its stand, open to a page about 2/3 of the way through. I stepped close with the lamp, and I did not touch it, and I read the visible page from where I stood. Signatures, dates and names, the way a visitor book holds them. The dates on the open page ran from the 1930s and 40s. Families who'd driven up to see the Reason Museum in the years before the road failed and the world forgot the place. Perfectly ordinary. And at the bottom of the left-hand page, below the last dated entry from the summer of 1948, there was one more line, in fresh dark ink with no age to it at all. No fade, no foxing, the ink still holding a faint shine in the lamplight, and it read, "Welcome back, Wade. We kept your things." I did not sleep that night. I sat up with the lamp and the stove, and I generated every rational explanation a rational man can generate, and I generated all of them, methodically, out loud, like a checklist. The cataloger who'd quit after 9 days had written it as a cruel joke on his replacement. Priscilla, or someone at the trust, had written it to test me, to see if I'd break the one rule. I'd written it myself, in some exhausted fugue, and forgotten. My name was on the contract, on the keys, on the sign-in sheet at the Deer Lodge office. Anyone connected to the job could have known it. But not one of those explanations survived contact with the ink being fresh, wet-looking, unfaded, in a building that had been locked and empty until I arrived with the only key. And not one of them touched "We kept your things," because I had never in my life set foot in Powell County before that week. And a man does not leave his things in a place he has never been. In the morning, in daylight, with coffee scalding in me, I made a decision that I still believe was the right one, even knowing everything it cost. I decided to treat the sentence as evidence, to photograph it, log it, and investigate it exactly as I would any other anomaly in the collection. Fear, I told myself, is only the body's signal that you have found something real. I had found something real. My job, the only job I had ever been good at, was to find out what. I photographed the page. I still have that photograph. It is one of the 3 I kept. Then I broke the rule the rest of the way. I put on my cotton gloves. Provenance habit. You never touch old paper barehanded. And I picked up the visitor book, and I read it from the very beginning. It opened in 1891, the year the store opened. And for its first decade, it was exactly what it should be. A store and post office register. People signing for mail. Drummers and mine agents and assay men passing through. The ordinary breathing traffic of a working town, in a dozen different hands because a dozen different people signed it. Then I reached the spring of 1902, and the book changed, and my hands went cold inside the gloves. Starting in March of 1902, the same month the store ledger went blank, the entries stopped being various. They were all in a single hand, the spidery, deliberate, slanting hand, the same hand that had labeled every photograph and kept every record in that building, which I would later confirm belonged to Cordelia Reason, Anselm's wife. And they were no longer sign-ins. They were a list, a name, and beside the name a date, and beside the date, always, without a single exception, the same 3 words: kept and welcomed. I counted the names in that first section, 22, and when I checked them against the graveyard notes I'd take 2 mornings later, they were the same 22, the same names, in the same order, as the stones marked 1902. I sat down on the museum floor with the book open in my lap, and I stayed there a long time. And I'll tell you the thing that undid me about it, because it wasn't fear, not at first. It was that the list was tender. Cordelia Reason had not written died beside those names. She had not written departed, or lost, or taken. She had written kept and welcomed, in a careful, loving hand, the way you would note in a diary a beloved guest you were overjoyed to have under your roof at last. And she had gone on writing in that book, off and on, for the rest of her life. The list continued past 1902, sparse now, a name or 2 a year, then a name every few years, always in her hand, always kept and welcomed, running all the way to 1961, which I later confirmed was the year Cordelia herself died, at 94. And then the book leaped forward, a gap of some years, and then the entries resumed in a different hand, younger, rounder, a schoolgirl's hand grown up, running from the early 1980s to 2009. Ada Reason, the granddaughter, the last of the line. She had picked up her grandmother's list and carried it another 50 years, the same 3 words, kept and welcomed. The last entry in Ada's hand was dated in 2009, and it was her own name, Ada Reason, kept and welcomed. A woman signs her own name into the register of the kept, in her own hand, and then she dies, and the museum is locked forever, and willed to a trust, with orders that it be fed a cataloger every few years, and never, ever opened. Below Ada Reason's name, the pages were blank, except for the one line, in the same fresh, unfaded ink as the welcome on the other page that had come for me. I turned to it, and I want to be exact, because this is the moment I stopped being able to lie to myself. The welcome backline I'd photographed the day before was still there on the 30s-40s page, unchanged. But now, on the blank page after Ada's name, there was a second new line that I would swear before God, and a jury had not been there the night before. Same fresh dark ink. It read, "You always come back. This is the 4th time." I closed the book. I set it back on its stand exactly as I'd found it, and I walked out into the middle of the meadow in the full flat light of a clear October noon, where I could see in every direction for a 1/4 mile, and there was not a tree or a wall or a shadow for a grown man to hide behind. And I stood there, and I made myself breathe, and I looked back at the museum building, and every window of it was watching me. Here is what I did next, and I did it because it is who I am, and I don't know how to be anyone else. I did not run. I built a case. I decided that whoever or whatever was writing in that book was making a specific, factual, testable claim. That I had been to Refuge before, more than once, 4 times in fact, and that a factual claim can be checked against the record, and that if it checked out, I would know something terrible and true, and if it did not check out, I would know it was a trick, a game, a cruelty played by a living human hand, and I could stop being afraid of a book. And I was standing inside the single most complete records collection in the state of Montana. If I had been there before, there would be evidence. So I went looking for myself. I started with the ordinary sign-ins from the 1890s, before the list began. I read every name in the register, and every name in the store ledgers, and every name in the census, and it took the better part of 2 days. And in the register for August of 1897, among the drummers and mine agents and passing families, I found an entry in a hand that was not mine, but that signed a name that was W. Corrigan, surveyor, Deer Lodge Co., 38 years before I was born. Corrigan is a common enough name. Montana is full of Irish. I wrote that down, and I made myself believe it for about 6 more hours. Then I went back to the photograph wall, and this time I was not cataloging faces. I was hunting one. In the big group photograph, the one labeled All Souls, 1901, standing at the very end of the back row, half turned as though he'd shifted his weight the instant the shutter opened, was a man in surveyor's clothes with a transit tripod up on his shoulder. I have studied that photograph under a jeweler's loupe for 11 years. It is me, not a man who resembles me, not an ancestor with the family nose. Me, the nose I broke at 19, healed a half-degree crooked. The way I stand with my weight thrown onto my left leg to spare a right knee I've favored since I wrecked it on a dirt bike at 14. The particular set of my shoulders. A man born in 1975, standing at the edge of a crowd of 40 souls out of a town of 111, in a photograph taken in 1901, in a valley I had never entered until that week. That was the night I heard the singing. I had stopped sleeping much by then, and I was awake on the cot near midnight when it came down the valley. Faint, from up the slope, from the direction of the church. Voices, a great many of them, in harmony, unhurried, singing a hymn I did not know and have never since been able to find, slow and full and heartbreakingly warm. And under the voices, threaded through them, a pump organ, the same dust-furred pump organ I would find in photograph a week later, sitting silent and long dead in the church. I lay there, and I listened to it the way you'd listen to your mother singing in another room when you were small and safe. And that is the honest and shameful truth of it. It was the most welcoming sound I have ever heard in my life. I wanted, with my whole body, to walk up that slope toward it. I did not. I lay there with my hands knotted in the blanket, and I let it end on its own. And when it ended, the silence afterward was the loneliest thing I have ever felt. In the morning, there was frost on the meadow, unbroken, no tracks in it. Not mine, not a deer's, nothing between the museum and the church. And in that frost, only on the museum's front porch, directly outside the door, there were boot prints, a single set, facing inward, toward the door, as though someone had stood on my porch a long while in the night, looking in. I want to tell you I called Priscilla that morning and quit. I didn't. 2 things held me there, and I've had a long time to be honest with myself about both. The first was professional stubbornness, some flaw wired deep in me that cannot abandon an unfinished record, that would rather understand a terrible thing than walk away from a comfortable ignorance. The second was worse and truer, and I have only ever confessed it in that psychologist's office, and now to you. I had lived most of my adult life alone, unmarried, unmoored, moving from one contract to the next, no one waiting, no one calling to make sure I'd made it home, no chair anywhere with my name on it. And there was a part of me, a part I am ashamed of to this day, that read we kept your things and you always come back, and felt, underneath all the terror, a small, warm, terrible gratitude. Somebody had kept my things. Somebody was glad I was back. Somebody had stood on my porch in the frost all night just to be near me. That is how it works. I understand that now, better than I understand almost anything. It does not come for you with teeth. It comes for you with belonging. It finds the hole in you and it fills it. And it fills it so gently that by the time you feel the shape of what's holding you, you no longer want to be let go. The historical investigation cracked all the way open on the 9th day. And it cracked because I finally went inside the church. I had put it off, and I decided the putting off was itself unprofessional, and probably a symptom of exactly the isolation stress Priscilla had warned me about. So on a hard, bright, cold morning, I took my camera and my clipboard, and I walked up the slope, past the bone-white house, to the church at the head of the valley. From the outside, it was small and entirely ordinary. Inside, at first, it was ordinary too. Plain pews, a plain altar, The pump organ furred gray with a century of dust, hymnals swollen and warped with damp, a water-stained painting of a shepherd on the back wall. I photographed all of it, and I would have walked out and written it up as an unremarkable frontier Union church, except for Gil Pruitt's grandfather's words, which would not leave me. They built onto the church, so I looked for the addition, and I found it the way you find anything you've been told is there. Once you stop assuming a place is what it appears to be. The inside of the church was shorter than the outside. I paced it, heel to toe, twice. The exterior of the building ran a hair over 50 feet. The interior sanctuary was about 35. There were 15 feet of building behind the altar wall that could not be reached from inside the church, and no door in the altar wall to reach it by. I found the way in from outside, around the back, half swallowed by a lilac gone wild and leafless. A low door, padlocked, but the wood of the frame had rotted around the hasp, and I am not proud of it, but I pried the hasp free with a tire iron from my truck, and I went in with my headlamp. The addition was a single long windowless room, and it was full of chairs. Not pews, chairs. Ordinary wooden kitchen and parlor chairs. Dozens upon dozens of them, arranged in careful straight rows, all facing the same way. Toward the back of the sanctuary they could not see, and could not be seen from, as though the people meant to sit in them were attending. From behind the wall, a service that faced away from them, and on the back of every single chair, tied on with ribbon, was a card. And on every card, in Cordelia Reason's spidery hand, and, on the newer ones, in Ada's rounder one, was a name, and a date, and the 3 words, kept and welcomed. I counted the chairs. There were far, far more than 22. There were more than 140. The list in the visitor book had never stopped at the diphtheria dead. It had gone quietly on, for 60 years under Cordelia, and 50 more under Ada, every soul who died in that valley. And, I understood as I walked the rows with my headlamp reading the names, some who had never died there at all, because near the back, on a chair no dustier than the rest, tied with a ribbon that had not faded at all, there was a card that read, W. Corrigan, 1897, kept and welcomed, and the chair beside it was empty of any card. Its ribbon was tied and waiting and new, and the little card slotted into the ribbon was blank. I understood the room then, or I understood enough of it that the rest arrived on its own like cold water finding every low place. Gil's grandfather had gotten it close but not right, the way folklore always does. This was not a church that kept its dead. This was a church built to keep everyone. The reasons, after the sickness of 1902, after they had watched 1/5 of everyone they loved choke to death in a single spring, while a doctor stood by helpless and then rode down the mountain and quit and died. The reasons had not been able to bear the losing, and they had found, or made, or been given, some way to keep, not the bodies. The bodies were in the ground behind the church. I had read their stones. Something else, some record of a person more durable than a body, catalogued and welcomed and seated in a windowless room to attend, forever, a service that never ended and faced the other way. The visitor book was the register. The chairs were the reliquary, and the museum, the whole 100-year hoard of objects and photographs and personal effects, every wedding ring and cracked watch and single child's shoe in its own labeled envelope. The museum had never been a museum at all. It was a collection in a much older and darker sense of the word. Every object was a thing they had kept, so that the person it belonged to could be kept. We kept your things. I ran the numbers standing right there in that dark room, with my headlamp shaking on the rows of chairs, because running numbers was the only thing between me and coming completely apart. 111 living in 1900, 22 dead in 1902, but the books list and these chairs held more than 140 names, held more names than the census of the living had ever recorded for that town in any year, which meant the church had kept people who never appeared in any census at all. Travelers, drummers, a surveyor who signed the register once, in August of 1897, and was never recorded leaving. You always come back. This is the fourth time. I went back down to the museum, and I did the last piece of the historical work, and it is the piece that finally broke me all the way, and I'll give it to you exactly as I found it. I pulled the ordinary sign-in register, the first decade, before the list began, and I read every entry not as a name, but as an event, an arrival, and I built a simple 2-column table on a blank inventory form. People who signed in and arrived. Against them, people the record confirmed had later lived on. Bought supplies again, appeared in a census, signed again another year, were mentioned in another's letter, died with a dated stone. I found 41 names, across the whole life of the town, that appeared in the record exactly once and then went silent. 41 people who came to Refuge, were written down arriving, and were never once recorded doing anything else. No second purchase, no census, no departure, no death, no stone, just an arrival, and then a century of silence. And then, when I cross-checked every one of them, a chair, a card, kept and welcomed. 41 souls the valley had taken quietly across 100 years, in ones and twos, slow enough and rare enough that no census man, no country doctor, no sheriff, 40 minutes down a mountain road, ever saw the pattern, because the pattern was only visible from inside, only visible to someone doing exactly what I had been hired to do. And W. Corrigan, surveyor, 1897, was one of the 41. And there was an empty chair beside his, with a new ribbon and a blank card, waiting for a name. I called Priscilla that night at 7, and something in my voice must have reached her before I got a word out, because she spoke first, and her voice was flat and tired and unsurprised. You went in the church. There are chairs in there, I said. There are names on them, Priscilla. More than 100. There's a chair with my name on the card. My name and 1897. The line was silent so long I thought the repeater had dropped us. Then she said it, and I have never in 11 years forgotten the exhaustion in it. The sound of a person who has known a thing for 30 years and has never once been permitted to say it out loud. The trust doesn't preserve that place to keep people out, Mr. Corrigan. It preserves it to keep it fed. There has to be a cataloger. There has to be somebody up there, alone, working through the collection, signing on for the season, one every few years. It's in the will. Ada's will requires it. In language the lawyers made just vague enough to be legal, that the collection be continuously documented by a resident custodian. The grant is real. The work is real. But the reason there is always a job at Refuge is that the place requires a visitor. It has to be visited. That's what the visitor book is for. That's the only thing it's ever been for. I didn't sign it, I said. I never touched a pen to it, I swear to God. You don't sign it with a pen. She was quiet a moment. Ada didn't sign her own name in that book, Mr. Corrigan. I helped carry her casket. I stood at the graveside. Somebody finished Ada's catalog for her, after. Somebody always finishes the last one's catalog. A breath, and then, low and fast, the only unguarded thing I ever heard her say. How much of the collection do you have left to do? I looked at the work table, at the one glass cabinet of personal effects still uninventoried, and the 3 photographs I hadn't yet logged. Almost nothing. A day. Less. Then don't finish it. Do you hear me? Do not finish the catalog. Leave it undone and come down. Come down tonight, right now, in the dark, and drive straight through, because I think finishing is how it's done. I think when the catalog is complete, the visit is complete, and when the visit is complete, she stopped. Come down, Wade. I hung up, and I did not finish the catalog. I want that on the record above everything else I've told you. I left the last glass cabinet of personal effects uninventoried. I left the photograph wall 3 frames short, and I have come to believe, in the years since, that this deliberate incompleteness, this one unfinished inventory, the only unfinished job of my whole career, may be the only reason I am alive to tell you any of it. I packed my truck in the dark, the one thing I had been warned above all not to do, and as I carried my gear across the meadow under a sky thick and white with stars, Every warning Gil Pruitt had given me arrived at once and made sense, because the church at the head of the valley was lit, not with electricity. There is no power run to that church. I had cataloged its bare walls that very morning. It was lit from within by a soft, moving amber glow, the exact warm color of a great many candles, and the windows I had that morning photographed, as empty of glass and dark and dead, were full of the light of a service in progress, and I could hear it, faint down the slope, the pump organ, the dead pump organ, playing that same slow, full hymn, and under it and inside it, the voices of a great many people who were, all of them, glad. Glad the way a family is glad when the last one finally comes home for the holiday. Glad, I understood with a cold that had nothing to do with October, that the cataloger was almost done. I did not go toward it, and I need you to understand, because no one who wasn't standing in that frost can understand it, that not going was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was not frightening the way I had braced for. It was the opposite of frightening. It was the most welcoming, most loving, most home-like sound I have ever heard or will ever hear, and there was a chair up there with my name already on it, and an empty one beside it, waiting for the rest of me, and I have never, in all the 11 years since, stopped being afraid of how badly I wanted to walk up that slope and sit down and be kept and welcomed, and never, ever alone again. I got in the truck. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice into the footwell. And when I finally got the engine turned over and the headlights on, the beams swung across the front of the museum, across the porch, across the front door I had failed to lock in my hurry, standing open on the dark inside, and in the doorway stood a woman, elderly, a long, dark, high-collared dress 100 years out of fashion, her white hair pinned up in a style no living woman has worn in a century. And she was not threatening me. She was not reaching for me or barring my way. She was holding the visitor book, open, in both her hands, cradled and offered, the exact way an usher holds out a hymnal to a latecomer at the door of a church. She was showing me the book. She was holding the door for a guest, patient and kind, offering me one more chance to come inside where it was warm and lit and full of singing. I know that face now. I have matched it against a labeled photograph in my own files. It is Cordelia Reason, who died in 1961. I drove down that mountain in the dark, faster than that road has ever been driven before or since. I did not stop at the gate. I drove through the chain, tore the front bumper half off the truck, and dragged it screaming down the gravel for 100 yards before it came loose. I did not stop again until I was down on the interstate at Drummond, under the white sodium lights of the gas station, with living human beings visible through the glass, and I sat in that parking lot with the engine running and the doors locked until the sun came up over the Clark Fork. Here is how it ends, and here is the piece of evidence I promised you, the one that no psychologist's diagnosis has ever been able to touch. I never went back. The trust terminated my contract for abandonment of the site, and, I want you to notice this, did not sue me. Did not bill me for the gate, or the chain, or the damage, did not do a single one of the things a normal institution does when a contractor destroys its property and walks off a paid job in the middle of the night. They simply closed the file, quietly, as if it had all gone more or less to plan, only a day short. Priscilla Hartang retired that same winter and moved to her daughter's place in Spokane, and she spoke to me exactly once more, on the phone, in January. She told me she had made certain the trust hired the next cataloger from far out of state, someone with no family, someone no one would come looking for. And then she was quiet a while, and then she said she was sorry, that she had known for 30 years and had never had the courage to do more than tell people to call in at 7 o'clock every night. And then she told me the last true thing, the thing that still wakes me. The 7 o'clock call, she said, had never once been to check that we were safe. It had been to check whether we had stopped calling, whether we had finished, whether the visit was complete and there was room, now, to send the next one up. I kept 3 photographs from that job, and I have them still, in a fireproof box I do not open often. The visitor book page reading "We kept your things." The page reading "You Always Come Back." This is the fourth time. And the group photograph, All Souls, 1901, with the surveyor at the edge of the back row who is me. I had all three examined. A photographic historian at the university studied the group photo and confirmed the print is a genuine period albumin photograph. Correct paper stock, correct silver chemistry, correct pattern of aging in the emulsion, no evidence anywhere of retouching or double exposure or later insertion, consistent in every measurable respect with a photograph made in 1901. He could not explain the man at the edge. He suggested, not meeting my eyes, that I must simply have an ancestor I strongly favor. And I let him believe it, the way I let the psychologist believe what she believed, because those small, comfortable explanations let people sleep at night, and I have never wanted to take anyone's sleep the way mine was taken. But that photograph is not the thing I come back to. The photographs I can at least hold at arm's length. The last thing I can't. About 2 years ago, I was cleaning out a storage unit, and I found the cardboard file box of field materials from that job that I had never once had the stomach to open. Notebooks, blank forms, the standard state inventory sheets, all of it exactly as I'd thrown it in the truck that night, and folded inside my field notebook, tucked between 2 pages where I know I never put it, because I never handled that book without gloves, and I never removed one single thing from that building. There was a loose page, old paper, heavy, ruled, foxed with age, torn cleanly along one edge, the exact way a page tears out of a bound leather ledger. It is a page from the visitor book, and it is blank except for 2 lines, and the ink on both lines is fresh. After 11 years, still dark, still faintly holding the light, and both lines are written in my handwriting. I have compared them, side by side, against undoubted samples of my own hand from that same year. They are mine. Every loop and slant is mine. I did not write them. They are mine. The first line is dated the last day I was up there, the night I ran, and it reads, W. Corrigan, kept and welcomed. And the second line carries no date at all, and it is the reason I check the lock on my door twice every single night before I can lie down. And it is the reason I have finally set all of this down now, while I still can, while I am still the one holding the pen. The second line reads, See you next time, Wade. Your chair is still warm. That concludes tonight's file. If you've ever experienced something strange or unexplained, I'd love to hear your story. You can share it in the comments or send it to the email in the description. It might become a future case on Midnight Files. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and join me for more documentary-style horror stories. Until next time, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the things we can't explain are the ones we never forget.